When you think of a heavy, you expect thick armour, poor gun handling, bad mobility, but what if I told you the Object 277 flipped the meta upside down? What's even better is you don't have to pay real money for the pleasure of taking it out for a spin. So why would you pick the Object 277? Because there are a ton of heavy tanks at tier 10 that are blatantly overpowered, things like the Object 279E, we have the Chieftain, but how can this Soviet free vehicle at tier 10 be able to compete with them? Well, you're going to see that throughout the entirety of this gameplay, and I really want to showcase and focus on the fact that you don't always have to pay to play, and hopefully that will come through with this video. But you can see here he's using the ridgeline and going to come out with a perfect result. We've got a ton of gameplays, we're going to short them up and clip them into small chunks so you guys can get the best idea of how this tank plays and also how you can take it out, because that is ultimately what we're trying to do. Hopefully you guys do enjoy, and we'll get straight into it. So, what makes the 277 so great? Well, of course, it has the 490 alpha damage that you'd expect from some of these top tier Soviet heavy tanks, which allows it to outtrade a lot of the tanks that you might come up against, things like the Chieftain, whilst also having the mobility of a lot of medium tanks in the game at 55 kilometers an hour. So not only are you able to dish out a lot of damage all in one go, but you're also able to then move and change flanks. You're able to be very flexible. And as I always say in World of Tanks, the more flexible a tank is, usually the higher the skill cap of the vehicle is, the more you're able to impact the game. Of course, when we talk about a Maus, if for example you end up going on the wrong flank, or maybe you don't realise soon enough that you need to turn around, you are basically stuck by the tank itself. Whereas the 277, a hell of a lot more flexible, you have the opportunity to change flanks and impact the game in a different way. So that's what really makes this vehicle completely different from what you usually expect from these heavies in the game, and that's why I think the 277 is fantastic. But there are plenty more other reasons, and you can see here straight away within the first few minutes of the game beginning, is able to push through an entire flank, and that position up there on the hill was really good, because you can use the turret armor of the 277, which is really strong to all intents and purposes, and a very hard one to pen reliably unless you can hit a cupola, which is very minuscule, as I'm sure you know, with most of the Soviet heavies. So you saw the tank on a map where it kind of opened up Lakeville, obviously with the valley push, ending up actually being able to come out on top and get yourself into a nice position. But what about a bit more of a stalemate map in Westfield? Well, Westfield predominantly focuses around that central hill location which you're seeing here, and actually the 277's quick enough such that it can get into this position right here, which gives you side shots onto things like this ST1 and things like this. So you can utilize this within your own gameplays if you want to be able to come out with a decent chunk of damage, and if you're playing at things that have usually high alpha, because you could make better trades. If they do actually get a return shot on you, you're going to come out better. Now what you're seeing here is that the enemy team have kind of pushed down into their side of the hill, but they've not taken any foothold around this central location over here, which is obviously not the worst thing in the world. But when they don't do that, you're able to push in and kind of farm up things like this Badger, and you're seeing here him using the kind of heavy kind of weight to be able to push the Badger and kind of bully him into submission. Now the Badger finding it a bit of a struggle to be able to cope with the push of the 277, and there you go, the Badger's removed really quickly. Really nice beginning to the game, and pushed into the dip. You guys can use this push as well, but remember you do have to think about some of the external factors like people on this ridge here, and if they are here you can kind of get pushed, and as you push down the hill you're going to get farmed from this location. If you enjoy the aggressive nature of the Object 277, then please do aggressively hit that like button, and of course subscribe if you do enjoy it. I'm sorry for the shameless plug, but it really does help out the channel massively. So we've talked a lot about the flexibility of the 277, but my main problem and main issue with this vehicle is that yes, it might get really good kind of alpha damage, it might get good penetration. You got 265 mil of penetration on your standard rounds, I believe, and even more on your heat rounds. You've got up to 340 heat pen, which is disgusting, and why you're able to rip apart tortoises. But back to the original was that you don't necessarily get the most amount of gun depression. You have 5.5 degrees, which, I mean, it's not fantastic, and it is Soviet in nature, but you know, it's not the best in the world. You'll see things like the Chieftain having way better gun depression, but of course you do have to actually somehow get that vehicle, which for the most part, and yeah, it's just a pain in the arse for most people. So they're never going to be able to get it. But this one is obviously free for everyone to pick up. It's the tier 10, or one of the tier 10 heavy tanks from the Soviet line. Now, because the 277 can push really well, you can also get spotting damage, as you're seeing here, because of that speed and also having fairly substantial view range for a heavy. You've got, I believe, like 460 when you kit out with all of the perks that are going to boost it up. Of course, not having advanced optics, but still, yeah, really nice to see. Adds an extra level to your gameplay where you can play it in much more varied ways and have a lot more enjoyment from the game, as I personally prefer to have something that is going to actually make my life less difficult and annoying when I'm playing World of Tanks, so this one definitely does it. So you can see there, picked up over 10,000 combined damage, and with a nice little kind of swoop down onto the standard B, he's feeling, yeah, not so good. And the mobility, trying to escape from the standard B, you can see here, and he does actually avoid the shell from the standard B and ends up ramming him for an extra bit of damage. Will the standard B reload before him? No, because of the fact that that auto-reloading Italian just doesn't quite deal with the 277. So the Muravanka early push is one of the nice things that you can use with the 277 and a tank with the mobility of this, because what you can do is you can get into this spot and you can get free shots on the side of the heavies who may be pushing aggressively down into the dip in the center, and that allows you to not only remain hidden, no one's really got an easy shell on you, and you can just rip them apart. I mean, things like the Jaegeru, they're not going to be able to actually hit you unless they fully expose themselves, and of course that's not going to be worth it for them. And you can get some free shots you may not actually hit, but you know, either way, really good starting position. So here you go, obviously AMX pushing way too hard up into the middle of the position to try and get some shots onto the heavies, and from here you can just basically rinse them from the side, and yeah, they're feeling a little bit worse for wear, and you've picked up what, like 2,000 damage at the beginning of the game for very little damage in return, and they definitely got lucky in actually being able to deal damage in return from those, but yeah, still really good. Now when a flank looks like this, and you're seeing that there are predominantly a ton more vehicles on the enemy team surrounding you, you do always have the option to run, and there are also the option that you just need to out DPM them, and the DPM of this is about 2,800 depending on how you're running it. I mean, you can fully boost it up and you'll be about 2,900, but you know, the core thing about this tank is that you just keep it firing, and with the flexibility you're able to do that, because you know, you could have 3,500 DPM, but if you have 3 degrees gun depression and a terrible accuracy, you're probably not going to be reliably able to deal with that. But because this tank does have the accuracy, does have the mobility, does have the flexibility, you're able to push out damage like this. So just picking apart the opponents here, the 490 coming in really nicely, and that's why you can kind of change the dynamic between being a heavy and being a medium, and that is something I've really enjoyed about the 277. So when you do get pushed, it can be a little bit tedious. Now luckily the FV215B doesn't actually get the gun depression to be able to easily hit down into the hull armor, which would be a successful pen, but unfortunately for him, he YOLOs in too early, such that, you know, his teammates aren't actually pushing, they aren't distracting the 277, and he ends up actually getting taken out back to the garage himself, rather than taking the 277 back to the garage. So once again, now that the flank has officially been won on this side, you can then advance towards the final side, and then hopefully pick up some extra damage, which you wouldn't be able to do in traditional heavies. So, of course, when you push with the 277, you're expecting to meet early opposition, and they usually come in the form of the mediums, things like the UDES 1516, which are a very competitive tank when used by the correct player, but when you are coming up against both a VZ55 and the 277 working in a platoon, who are obviously very skilled players having received 3 marks, it's going to be a struggle for them to come away with a win. Now, Luckily, what we're seeing here is a perfect example of how you can use the 277 in this aggressive mindset, playing up against some of the other heavies in the game. So you saw there, little push up over. You can note that he put the rock in between him. If you're going to push on this flank, usually you want to push here, since you'll get this rock that can avoid some of the shells. If you want to poke some of these people, obviously you can still get hit by the TDs in the bushes over here, so just be careful when you do come around that corner if you are thinking about using this sort of strategy early on in the game. Obviously, really nice shell into the STI there, as you can hit up into the engine deck from the tracks below, and that is a really nice spot if you are thinking about coming up and side scraping. If you're in that sort of position, you know, you can use it. Now, for some reason, the STI decides he's going to come around the corner, and yeah, what a silly mistake he made. And the 60 TP ends up bouncing, having sat there for ages and ages, reloading and obviously aiming for the weak point of the 277, which is essentially the upper hull armor and also the lower plate, which you can easily pen. And actually, sometimes the lower plate can be a bit more of an annoying place to pen, since it is quite low profile, this tank, and you can end up being surprised at how much of an angle you can create when you're above it, because you're maybe a taller vehicle, and you can end up getting pushed down. Now, you're seeing great team play here, obviously sitting in front of the VZ55 to avoid him taking a unnecessary shell and ending back in the garage, since this game is already looking like it's going to be a horrible loss. I mean, they're down by over 5,000 damage, and luckily the VZ helps him out there, finishing him off. So, obviously, it's a nice snipe on the cupola of the UDES. I mean, most heavies would just have no idea how to be able to do that. I mean, the accuracy of this thing is just unbelievable, like we've spoken about already, and that allows you to do things like that. So, as I'm sure you're aware, everyone hates base cappers, so instead of sitting around and twiddling his thumbs in a Type 4 heavy that's never going to be able to return to base, instead he makes the aggressive push, and it's time to reset the cap. So with just 5 seconds on the clock, he pushes in, tries to find that 780, puts a lovely round into the weak point of the 780, being that flat plate, as when you angle you can pen it quite easily. Now the 780 is going to struggle from this point to be able to reliably pen, and of course the problem is that when you are in the 277, you are going to find it annoying to be able to deal damage, because of the fact that you maybe quite low profile, and a lot of the times you don't have the kind of raised profile to be able to shoot down onto hull armor, as well as the fact you have 5.5 degrees of gun depression. But a lovely little fire there helps him out and secures the damage remaining on that 780. But now it is a 1 versus 3, having defeated that last tank there. Now pushes the dead wreck of the Manticore on his team to only end up spotting the Manticore on the enemy team, secures the damage on him, and now it's time to use the wreck to be able to hide the lower plate and the hull armor, exposing only the turret, which is perfectly good on this vehicle, to then spot the 704 on the enemy team and hopefully be able to deal a couple shots of damage during the period at which the 704 is reloading. He decides that it's actually time to push, using the Manticore as the hull armor for today's video. Of course, the most amount of spaced armor you'll probably ever see on the hull of this tank, so I mean, it's always a good one to see. The 704 in a position that you weren't expecting, and he didn't actually manage to hit him blind earlier. Hits him on the move, which is lovely, and he actually manages, using the mobility that you wouldn't see with any other heavy, to get up into this position right here, which now allows him to kind of force the 704 to make a play. If the 704 doesn't move or do anything, he's going to find himself in a bit of a dire state. Nice little shell into the 704 there, and it's time for the 704 to make a play. And unfortunately for him, he doesn't quite have the what you'd expect from this sort of heavy tank, and he actually ends up punishing the 704 from behind, shuts him down for the final little bit of damage, and of course a nice little result. There's only just the artillery left in the game. So the pesky artillery does actually cap the base as he made his way to the enemy cap. And what a way to lose. If you enjoyed today's video on the 277, please hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.